I'm here with Stuart Nash, the MP for Napier and former Labour Cabinet Minister. Kia ora, Stuart, and thanks for talking with us.
Awesome to be here, mate.
Yeah, Stuart, it's been quite an eventful 6-8 weeks for you. How are you doing?
You know, that old beware the Ides of March, I didn't really take that. I thought that was sort of Julius Caesar. Look, it's been fantastic. It's been liberating in a way, because this is the first time since I was elected in 2008 that I've had my weekends back. Because in opposition, you know, there was always school fairs and stuff to do on Saturdays. I was always doing my street corner meetings. In government, you know, the whole time in government, except for the last 6 weeks I've been in cabinet. What happens when you're in cabinet on Friday evening, a big black bag, occasionally two turn up, and I was spending from 8 a.m. in the morning to midnight reading. And so, you know, my wife's loving me being back. I'm loving having my weekends, and it's time. And so it's liberating. I'm annoyed at the way it happened, but the result has, you know, it certainly opens up a whole lot of different doors and avenues.
Well, we'll go through how it happened and that, and you were fired from the cabinet by the Prime Minister for leaking cabinet information to two of your donors. Do you regret that, and what actually happened?
Yeah, I do regret that.
And what happened, I'll say, yeah.
Sure. So obviously, I put on an email a cabinet decision. I absolutely regret that, because as a result of that, I'm now no longer in cabinet, and I had some really important roles in cabinet, not least of which was managing the Hawke's Bay recovery, and we were quite a way ahead of any other region when I lost that portfolio. But what, you know, the narrative seems to have been that there was a cabinet meeting, a decision was made, and then I phoned up a couple of my donors who were big property developers and divulged information that they could then use to their advantage. Nothing could be further from the truth. Okay. This was the middle of COVID, remember? So the common rules around making policy and decision making had gone out the window. We were acting at a great rate of knots, and we were dealing with issues as they arose. As the Minister for Small Business, what had happened is that there were some landlords, commercial landlords, that had given SMEs rent relief. There were some landlords that had clauses in their lease agreements that required them to give rent relief. And then there were some who had no such clauses in their agreements. And by and large, there were a couple of companies, a number of companies who owned commercial buildings who weren't giving rent relief in any way, shape or form. The Prime Minister, Jacinda at the time, was being asked about this continuously. What are you doing to give rent relief to SMEs? Justice was dealing with it. They were really dragging the chain on this. It was important. I was on Mike Hosking every week being asked about the same question. So I said to the Prime Minister, can I come up with some work on this? She said, do that. I phoned up two of my very good friends who were also my donors, but also were the largest and the second largest commercial property owners in Wellington. And I'm not a commercial building owner. I mean, I don't have a competency in this area. And said, what do we need to do in terms of coming up with a policy that would give rent relief to SMEs, but also make sure that large multinational tenants weren't screwing over sort of your ma and pa commercial building owners who might own, you know, one or two buildings. We came up with a policy on this, keeping in mind both these guys had already given rent relief to all their tenants. So they were never going to make anything out of this whatsoever. This was not self-serving. It was
and you weren't going to make anything out of this either, huh?
I mean, I don't own any commercial buildings and I don't lease any commercial buildings. So no, this was all about how do we get rent relief to SME owners and operators who weren't getting it at this point in time. I thought I'd got it across the line. I didn't get it across the line, and what I did is, because we developed this policy, which I think was very robust. These guys knew the area. They were experts in this. Together we came up with this policy. I thought I was going to get it across the line. I didn't. After the cabinet meeting and after the policy had been released, I sent an email to these guys saying, sorry fellas, we didn't get it across the line. This is what happened in the meeting. Now, I broke the cabinet rules. The cabinet rules say you're not allowed to do this. Do I regret that? Absolutely, because I lost my job over it. Keeping in mind it was 3 years previous, and it only came out 3 years afterwards, but the bottom line is I broke the rules. But do I regret trying to come up with a policy for these SME owners? Not in any way, shape or form. I mean, as a cabinet minister, and certainly with my portfolios, I often called friends, acquaintances, contacts, my networks, to ask them for advice in areas that I didn't have a core competency in. Now, you know, sometimes they acted as sounding boards, sometimes they gave me ideas which I tested out. But, you know, as a minister, you're not an expert in every field. you go to the experts and you seek their advice. It doesn't mean that they have bought any favours. I have never acted in a way where any of my donors have ever benefited from having donated to my campaign. In fact, there's been a couple of instances where donors have put their name forward for boards that I have been in charge of, and I've had to say, sorry fellas, I can't put you forward because you are a donor, there's a perception of a conflict of interest here, and for both of us, we've got to stand back. So some of my donors have actually, I won't say been harmed, but have actually not got onto boards which they would have been highly capable and competent on because they donated to me. So I was never going to make any money out of this. These guys had already done the right thing. They'd been very active in the development of this policy, and all I was doing was communicating the result, but I did it in a way that actually, in hindsight, broke the Cabinet Manual.
So how would you have handled it if you could have it all over again, with feeding back to them?
I would absolutely have worked with them to come up with a policy, because the policy we came up with, I thought, was spot on, as did they. In the end, I suppose what I would have done is I would have waited till the policy came out, i.e. the one we agreed on in Cabinet. If they had then called me and said, hey, what happened to our proposal? I would have said, sorry fellas, it didn't get through, and I would have left it at that. I certainly wouldn't have put it down on an email, and I probably wouldn't have proactively called them. I would have just said, hey, you win some, you lose some, we lost this one. Let's move on and influence what we can.
Yeah. Now we'll get into your resigning as Police Minister and that, but I just want to ask you, around that whole thing of being fired and that, do you feel in any way, at any stage, you were treated unfairly, and why do you want to tell your side of things now?
Oh, look, it's... the rules are the rules. The Cabinet Manual is a guideline. It's not a legislated piece of, it's not an act of Parliament that means if you follow it then you end up in court or whatever. They are guidelines, but the Cabinet Ministers are expected to follow them. I did break the rules. Other ministers have broken the rules themselves, but in this particular situation, it is what it is. I accept that, and I've moved on.
And the process of being fired, was that fair?
Oh, look, it is what it is. It doesn't matter if it was fair or unfair. Like I said, it's liberating in a way. I'm disappointed in the way it happened. But it means that, as mentioned, a whole lot of other opportunities are opened up.
So one could say that your cabinet troubles began when you resigned as Police Minister after revealing on radio that you had spoken to the Police Commissioner 2 years prior about a court case and also criticising a judge's decision. You were once again there deemed to have breached the Cabinet Manual. Do you accept that as well? Because in the beginning you didn't think you had done anything wrong, but I think, has that changed? Do you think you did? Look,
the interesting thing is politicians are not supposed to criticise your judiciary. In our country, the judiciary are held up as sort of, beyond reproach. And, the firearms legislation is something that I took through as a Minister of Police. I spoke, obviously, a number of times on this legislation in Parliament. And because of the nature of how this came about, I spoke in the community a lot about the changes we were making. I felt that the judge who had imposed the sentence on a person who had broken quite, egregiously the legislation, I felt that the sentence this person had been given was manifestly unfair, i.e. it was far too lenient compared to the breaches and compared to what I had been saying in the community. Now, I suppose the question is, if the minister responsible for that legislation can't criticise a judgment, then who can? The police can't, but technically, well, not technically, I am not supposed to criticise judges. But who holds judges to account in the end? Now, I got that wrong because I did criticise a judge. There was another way about it. Perhaps I could have gone to the Prime Minister and said, hey, look, this is a manifestly unfair judgment. It's way too light. It's not what I had planned. It's not what I had communicated in all my speeches. Keep in mind, judges can use, when deliberating, what ministers have said in their speeches during Parliament. But, again, I got that wrong. Phoning Andy, that is something, for Andy Costa, the Police Commissioner.
Police Commissioner,
yeah, that is something I completely underestimated. So when I called him, I wasn't the Minister of Police. Andy is a good friend of mine. He had been heavily involved in the firearms buyback. I gave him a call, and as Andy himself said, he just saw it as someone venting. That's what I was doing. It was like, Andy, this sentence, this is a guy who had illegal firearms, illegal ammunition, he didn't have a licence, he had other firearms, again, without a licence, and the judge said, because you're not a gang member, I'm not going to send you to jail. Well, that was never part of the rationale. The rationale was we want people to do the right thing. If you have illegal firearms and illegal ammunition, and certainly if you didn't have a licence, then there was an expectation, and certainly I'd communicated this very, very clearly during the gun buyback and during the legislative process. You faced up to 5 years in jail.
So who should judges be accountable to?
I don't know. And this is the thing. I mean, they're obviously accountable to the public. But if a minister responsible for the legislation that's gone through, who knew it intimately, can't criticise a judge's decision, then who can? And it's a question that maybe needs to be debated by society. Now, I did get that wrong. I knew the rules at the time. So this was a calculated risk by me, which absolutely did not pay off. And I regret that. But what I woefully underestimated is making a phone call to Andy when I wasn't Minister of Police and asking him, are the police going to appeal this? They didn't appeal it. Andy Costa, the police commissioner, is a very smart man. I knew that a phone call from me to Andy was never going to sway him. A, I haven't got that influence. B, I haven't got that legislative influence. But C, as mentioned, this is just a guy venting to a commissioner who had similar interests. But, again, I got that wrong. And that's why I tendered my resignation in the police portfolio.
Because you kind of outed yourself. I mean, it was you that brought it up on a radio station. So do you regret having done that?
I do. I mean, anything that I've done that has caused me political harm, but also in a way government political harm as well, then I regret doing it. I shouldn't have, and I way, as mentioned, I way underestimated the influence a call to Andy Costa would have had as someone who wasn't the Minister of Police in terms of the fuss it would have caused. So I'm Labor through and through. I have worked for years and years and put everything, including my family, aside for the good of the Labor government. Anything that I do that causes damage or harm, no matter if it's short or long term, to the Labor government, I regret doing.
Now, when you resigned, you kept your other portfolios, but you were subsequently demoted down the Labour rankings after it came to light in September last year that as MP for Napier, you had contacted a senior official at MB to ask them to look at an immigration case of a health professional in your electorate. And they say you should have gone to the minister instead of going to the official. Tell us what happened there.
Well, we went to Cherry in my office, who's been with me for 8 years and is absolutely fantastic. Former immigration officer in Australia. We do a lot of immigration cases through this office. Well, we used to do a lot of immigration cases through this office. And Cherry, because this is her professional competency, knew who to advocate for and when perhaps the wool was being pulled over our eyes. We had two surgeons, not in my electorate, I don't know their names, had been on the waiting list for about 18 months.
So they weren't in your electorate?
Don't think so. Okay. No, but they were working at the Hawke's Bay DHB. And keep in mind, surgeons don't grow on trees, right?
No.
We want as many surgeons as we possibly can. They had come to my office. Cherry had gone to the minister. She was then told to go to the associate minister. The associate minister said, there's nothing more we can do. So as the chief MB minister, I phoned one of my officials and said, who was in charge of immigration, and said, hey, can you take a look at this? We're about to lose these guys. He took a look at it after being sent all the information from Cherry and decided that on balance, these guys should be let through. Again, no personal gain whatsoever. I don't even know the guys' names. Cherry was the one dealing with the case. I just made the phone call. But again, as minister, let alone as local MP, advocating to get two surgeons to stay in Hawke's Bay who had very clearly articulated their intention to leave because of what they saw as injustices in the immigration system, i.e. how long it was taking, then, if I can't use my influence to make sure two surgeons stay here, then I'm not too sure why I'm here.
But, I mean, as an MP, you advocate for people all the time.
All the time.
Yeah, so what happens? You're a minister, why does that change everything?
Well, apparently what I'd done is I'd circumvented process. So there are two things I could have done. When the Associate Minister came back and said there's nothing more we can do, I could have left it and these surgeons would have gone. What I then did is I went over and above that, and I phoned officials who had the ability to make decisions around this. And because of that, it was deemed that I didn't follow due process. Now, again, we have two surgeons here who wouldn't be here otherwise, but my role as the MP for Napier is to ensure that we get the best quality people living in our region who can really add value, and these two surgeons certainly did.
And the Prime Minister said that this was the final straw, basically your last chance. How did it come about? How did he find out about it and that?
There's a story behind it, but he found out about it. Yeah.
So you think someone dobbed you in, kind of thing?
Well, look, it doesn't really matter. The bottom line is he found out about it, and you know, I was questioned in detail about it, and you know, by not accepting the Associate Minister's course of action that there was nothing more that could be done, I had been deemed to circumvent. I mean, this is all out there anyway. Yeah. But again, you know, we now have two surgeons here who were very strong odds that they wouldn't be here if I hadn't done what I did. Yeah.
So after that, being told this is your final warning, did you spend the time like thinking back? Is there anything I've done that I should be worried about? And were you quite nervous after that?
I was asked, you know, is there anything else?
Yeah.
And you know, first of all, I didn't think that I'd done anything wrong by advocating for these two surgeons. And I said, you know, I said, listen, I was on Mike Hosking every week for about 3 years. I'm sure if you trawl back through my Hosking interviews, you'll find something there that I said that I shouldn't have said. But, you know, I have a reputation of getting stuff done, okay? And sometimes I'm the first to admit that I circumvent process. Now, that can have good benefits, but it can also put me at risk. Yeah. And, you know, this time, after 5.5 years in Cabinet, there were 3 things I did which circumvented process, which I broke the rules, and you know, I've paid the consequence, and I accept that. Yeah. But as mentioned, I'm disappointed in the way I'm leaving politics, but I'm very proud of what I achieved over 5.5 years as a Cabinet Minister. Worked incredibly hard under the most trying of circumstances. You know, I had ministerial responsibilities during March the 15th, during Whakaare White Island, during COVID, during the cyclones here, you know, during the recession, well not recession, during the economic slowdown. Yeah. So, you know, it was sort of 5.5 years of business as usual agenda, whilst also in the middle of crises trying to come up with solutions. And, you know, I am solution focused. I do like to think that I do get things done. Yeah. But, you know, when you're a Cabinet Minister, you are accountable to the people of New Zealand and the Prime Minister. You've got to follow due process, and, you know, there were times when I didn't.
Yeah, because everyone I speak to doesn't believe that you're corrupt or incompetent. They just think you've made, as someone said to me, a dumb mistake or a few dumb mistakes. Obviously, your reputation has taken a knock. How do you recover from this?
Oh, look, I've always said that politicians are forgotten 10 minutes after they leave, and that's the way they should be. You know, any politician who believes they're coming in and creating a legacy for themselves is dreaming. You know, people may remember, well, they'll remember the Ardern government as they remember the Key government and the Clark government, but no one remembers individual MPs themselves or even ministers, with a couple of rare exceptions. You know, like I said, I mean, I think my record in various portfolios stands up to scrutiny. Yeah. Did I make dumb decisions? I circumvented process, and perhaps I should have known better. Yeah. And as a consequence of that, still trying to get stuff done, never benefiting myself in any way, shape or form, never benefiting any of my donors, always working hard for the people of the Bay and the people of New Zealand, but I should have been a little smarter in ensuring that the processes set out that Cabinet Ministers are expected to follow, that I did follow those.
Do you think you'll be remembered for your body of work or for this?
I don't think I'll be remembered. Again, you know, you come back in 6 years' time and ask the people of Hawke's Bay, do you remember Stuart Nash? Most people go, who was he? You know, the thing is that I know what I've achieved as a Cabinet Minister. I'm very proud of that. I don't expect to be remembered. I expect Jacinda's government to be remembered at the way we handled COVID, at what we did with firearms, at the way we handled Whakaare White Island. the way that Jacinda and the government handled March the 15th.
Yeah.
But as an individual minister, I don't expect to be remembered at all.
Yeah. So was it a tough decision to retire from politics?
No, it wasn't. Look, a very senior politician on the Labour side came to me and said, there's a way through this. And he outlined 2 other ministers that had been sacked under Helen Clark. And he said, what you do is you stand in Napier again, and if Labour's in government, then you go on the backbench and you work really hard. If National's in government, then you go into opposition and you work really hard for 3, 6, 9 years, for as long as they're there. And then next time there's a Labour government, you come back as a minister. And I said, I've got better things to do with my life than sit in Parliament for 3, 6, 9 or 12 years as a backbench or as an opposition MP in the hope I'm going to make it into cabinet when I'm 64, 65. Yeah. I'm as mentioned, I'm very proud after 5.5 years in cabinet around what I achieved. No regrets whatsoever, apart, well, we all have regrets. Yeah. I did regret sending that email. If the end of my parliamentary career had been when I didn't get back on the list in 2011, then I think I would always be watching the television, listening to politics and gone, what if? Yeah. My team and I worked for 2 years between 2012 and 2014, 2 years, raised a lot of money, campaigned really, really hard to win Napier in 2014. And so having been the MP for Napier for 9 years, absolute privilege and a pleasure. It doesn't get any better than that as a Napier boy. But it's time now for me to go, and I leave knowing that I think I've made a really solid contribution to this country.
Because things probably are still a little bit frosty now with the Prime Minister and that, but you did have a circle of close friends, I know, in Cabinet and that. Yeah. Are those relationships still...
Absolutely, yeah. So Kelvin Davis, Kelvin, his political career and mine have sort of mirrored each other. Well, up until 6 weeks ago. We both got in as list MPs in 2008. We both disappeared in 2011. We both, in 2014, I was the only person to win a seat off the Nats, and he was the only person to win a seat off a sitting MP, Hone Harawira. Yeah. We both got into cabinet at the same time. And so, he's a very good friend of mine and will remain so. Yeah. Just because you stuff up, it doesn't mean your true friends desert you. Yeah. And so, no, I still have great relationships with a number of those guys. And, I wish them, including the Prime Minister. He got elected at the same time as me, as did Grant. And so, I consider them friends. I consider them colleagues, and they will be up until the election. And absolutely, I work incredibly hard to ensure that they're back come October the 14th, and anything I can do or I'm asked to do to help with that, I will.